Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. Campbell Newman was today officially sworn in as Premier of Queensland after one of the most stunning electoral victories ever seen in Australia, vowing to get down to business fast. Labor is in disarray as it sets about trying to form an effective opposition. John Taylor reports.
Campbell Newman's push to be Premier, whilst not even a Member of Parliament, was either going to be the smartest thing the Conservatives ever did or the dumbest. Now it appears to be genius.
I will well and truly serve the people of Queensland in the office of Premier.
Campbell Newman today was sworn in as Premier after crushing the Labor Party. Queensland's Parliament has been transformed. Before Saturday's election, Labor held 51 seats in the state's only chamber, 20 more than the Liberal National Party. Now the LNP is predicted to have 77, leaving Labor with a predicted 8. With these sorts of numbers, Campbell Newman is on track to be Premier for at least 2 terms. As he claimed victory, the former Brisbane Lord Mayor and Army officer promised his government would conduct itself with grace, humility and dignity.
Tonight I acknowledge that many of you have never voted for the Liberal Party, never voted for the National Party before and never voted for the LNP. So I thank you for your support. It's an honour that you would trust us with this responsibility by handing us that vote. Thank you.
Anna Bligh was Australia's first woman elected Premier. Now her departing legacy is leading her party to its worst ever defeat. She won her seat, but yesterday announced her resignation.
I simply don't believe that Labor can develop an effective opposition or rebuild from this point and from this defeat if it has me as part of its public face and in its ranks.
Campbell Newman has had an enormous victory, but is such a crushing win good for democracy?
Look, I'll leave that to the commentators and particularly the political academics, how that works. But it's really about how we conduct ourselves. And I've made some strong commitments about the way we intend to conduct ourselves in government. And I'm going to hold the team, whether they be the backbenchers or the ministers, to account in terms of the way that we behave as a government. Let's see how we go.
It's believed Anastasia Palaszczuk is going to have the unenviable task of leading Labor in opposition. The former Transport Minister still formally has to have the approval of caucus, even though that seems too big a word for what's left of Labor. Virtual unknown Curtis Pitt from the state's far north is another Labor MP joining her in opposition.
Well, I'm certainly someone who's going to have to play a role, like all of the other caucus colleagues, because there's going to be so few of us. We're all going to have to carry quite a burden, but to make sure that we're going to be presenting ourselves not only as the building blocks of a future alternative government in Queensland, but of course also one that was an opposition that is going to keep a Campbell Newman-led government honest.
But the larger question confronting Labor is how did it get to this? Longevity is part of it, but many are pointing to a key decision of Ms Bligh's premiership.
Queensland, not for sale!
Just after Anna Bligh's historic 2009 victory, she announced a suite of multi-billion-dollar asset sales. It surprised many and prompted fierce union outrage. And Labor State Secretary Anthony Chisholm says that marked the end of government.
I think the election result was heading this way for basically 2.5 years. So our own internal polling showed that we were heading for a significant loss.
Accepted. Oh, Campbell, what a tangled web you weave.
Labor's campaign was at first relentlessly negative, then ended with a plea for sympathy. Anthony Chisholm has no regrets for attacking the integrity of Campbell Newman and his family.
It was the only option we had in terms of closing the gap. If we continued on the path we were going, we were heading for a massive, massive defeat. We owed it to Labor people and Labor supporters to do everything we could to close the gap. The fact is that that was working. Mr Newman managed to trump it and jump all over it at the end, and certainly it cost us.
You've said that this election marks the end of the car-beating model. But what do you mean? A shift to the left?
I think what you see is that the traditional form of conservative economic management, tough on law and order, focus on education and service delivery, which was built up by sort of Carr, Beattie, Bracks, I think has gone by the wayside, especially as you see we're out of government across Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland now.
What replaces it?
Well, that's, I think, the challenge for the future. I think for state Labor parties, there needs to be an ideological divide between us and the Tories at the state level. It can't just become about service delivery, because if it's about service delivery, all you will be doing is waiting for the other side to stuff up and then capitalise.
In a strange postscript, billionaire Clive Palmer, who is also a key supporter of the LNP, today thanked the government, the Greens and the media for extensively covering his comments last week about the CIA funding the Green movement. Today, Mr Palmer was trying to give the impression it was all a ploy.
That took a great lot of attention, of some of the negative aspects of the election. That was a very good thing. And we saw our Premier sail through with a wonderful positive attitude in the last 3 weeks.
And a very familiar name is about to enter local politics in Brisbane. Beattie. Heather Beattie. Peter Beattie's wife.
You really got to have an effective, strong voice. And I can tell you, having been married to her for a long time, it's a pretty powerful voice. It scares me, so maybe that'll happen at City Hall.
But if you say so, that's a very interesting development. I'll be supporting Vicky Howard, who's been campaigning for about 2 years, who's a member of Graham Quirk's LNP team.
But Campbell Newman is the man with the massive mandate, and he's in a hurry to start.
We do have a mandate for change. We've got a mandate for all the policies we put out there prior to the election, and we're going to move at the greatest, fastest rate to implement change in Queensland, and we make no apologies for that.
No one underestimates the size of the task ahead for Labor, least of all Labor itself. Earlier, I spoke with the party's Queensland President, Andrew Dettmer. Andrew Dettmer, everyone expected Labor to be booted out of office, but no one expected the defeat to be so resounding. Why did Queenslanders turn off Labor with such conviction?
Well, I think there's a number of factors, and I think that right now it's very important for Labor as a party, as a movement, to analyse those reasons and not simply go into some sort of recrimination fest. We need to make sure that what we do is analyse these results so that we can rebuild our party and deal with the issues that have been raised by the fact of this result. Was
one of the reasons the negative campaign that was run?
Well, I think that the negative campaign didn't help. I think the negative campaigning, especially after the CMC clearance of Campbell Newman, was a mistake. It's something that I believe was negative, not just for the Labor image, but also it was negative for the perception of Labor. And I think what really drove home that message was when the campaign ads, which came out saying, well, effectively Campbell Newman's going to win, don't give him too big a majority, that really ran up the white flag, and I think it gave licence to those people who otherwise may have supported us to turn around and say, well, I'm going to get with the winning team. And I find that that part of the campaigning strategy a little hard to contemplate, let alone understand why it would have been done.
So the people who were responsible for that campaign, should they remain in their jobs?
Well, as I said, it's a time for analysis. It's a time for making sure that we don't repeat these mistakes. And for us, I think if there are people to take responsibility for that, well then that will occur after that analysis, rather than in some sort of, as I say, recrimination fest.
With as few as 7 members in the Parliament, how does Labor rebuild now? Well,
one thing that I've said, and said very clearly, is that the time for factions and factionalism is over. That was a luxury we could afford when there was a large number of MPs in the state Parliament, and I say this as a former convener of the left faction. We cannot afford that. We need to get together as a party. We need to rebuild the party from the base. We need to be talking about the way that our party is operating. We need to talk about how we can make a difference in respect of working people's lives. We need to talk about how we can make a difference politically in the big questions that confront Australia. We have, after all, huge levels of development in this state, and that development is occurring in a way that is not bringing regional Queensland with us.
Labor without factions, that's a seismic shift, isn't it?
Well, it's something that I'm throwing down the challenge to my colleagues to say that we need to be operating together. I mean, after all, if there are only 7 people in the Parliament, what are we going to have? A faction of 1? I don't think that really works for anybody, and as I say, it's a luxury we can no longer afford.
Does there need to be a major change in any policy directions?
I think that some of the policies, clearly, for instance, privatisation, were wrong, and they need to be looked at. We need to be the party of working people. We need to be the party of people who want a fair and equitable society. We need to be the party that is going to provide people with hope and about a different Queensland, and not one which is simply beholden to the dollar and to those people who've got the most money. And I think that Labor has to revert to its roots, if you like, to ensure that we are actually representing those views, and we no longer have policy set from on high, which effectively provides solace to the big end of town through issues such as asset sales, but we need to actually have the capacity for that policy to be worked on by working people, by affiliated trade unions, by community groups and others, and we need to make sure that those people are part of the Labor family. They don't feel that they are part of that at the moment.
There's been a bit of commentary about what the implications are for the federal government. Peter Beattie says federal MPs need to spend a lot more time here, that Julia Gillard should buy a house in Queensland. Is there a message to federal Labor in the Queensland result?
I can't imagine that perhaps Peter Beattie's got his house on the market, but I digress. The issue is that, yes, federal MPs, especially senior federal MPs, do need to spend more time campaigning here. We get a little bit tired of the Sydney-Melbourne axis being all that is dealt with. Queensland has around, I think, 30 or 31 seats in Queensland federally, and we need to be making a very competitive showing to ensure that we can retain government. As it stands at the moment, we haven't seen a lot of our federal MP colleagues, as federal ministers, and we need to make it so that federal Labor is seen around the ridges in Queensland in a whole variety of situations.
A by-election will be held when Anna Bligh resigns from her seat of South Brisbane. Would you expect to hang on to that seat?
Well, I'm hoping that we do, but I'm also not an incurable optimist. I know that in situations such as this, as has occurred in other states where, for instance, Jeff Kennett resigned and his seat, which was previously considered a safe Liberal seat, was returned to the Labor Party for, in fact, not one but 2 terms, even though the people of South Brisbane did not swing anything like the level of other seats. Nevertheless, it's something that I would not, and no member of our party would take for granted.
Andrew Detmer, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.